So do you have any questions before I turn it over to Mr. Nelson?
I do not.
Okay, as to juror 29, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Get this off here. Good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Good. I'm going to start with some general questions, if that's okay.
That's perfect.
Get to know you a little bit, and then we'll move into some specific questions about your questionnaire answers. Okay?
Sure.
So if I were to meet you in a social situation, tell me a few things you'd want me to know about you after I walked away.
Short list would be, I'm an attorney. I have a 2-year-old daughter. In my free time, I like to work out and go to museums and watch documentaries.
Okay. And how did you feel when you got your jury service, jury summons?
I've actually always wanted to be called for jury duty just because I'm an attorney and I wanted to go through the process. I've never received it before, so it was the first time I've ever received it, so it was kind of like, hey, I finally got it.
So it wasn't a shock, a surprise, or anything of that nature?
No.
How about when you learned that it was in connection with this particular case?
That was more surprising.
And how so?
I guess when you heard about it on the news, you never exactly expect that you'd be one of the people who'd be called as a potential juror. Just statistically, it's a small percentage.
Right. Did you have concerns about your personal safety or anything of that nature?
No.
And how about when you came down to the government center today?
I mean, it definitely looks different than any other time I've been here, but
Right. I'm assuming as a practicing lawyer, you've been here once or twice?
yes, more than once or twice.
Yeah.
Yes,
And it's a lot different to get into the building now, isn't it?
very different.
Did all of the fortifications, preparations, things of that nature, did it alarm you?
I wouldn't define it as alarming, no.
How would you define it?
To some extent impressive, just how different it is from what I normally see, but it wasn't necessarily off-putting or scary or anything like that. It was just very different than every other time I've been down here.
Okay. Did it give you any sense of security?
Yes.
So as a lawyer, I'm assuming you have quite a bit of experience dealing with people's conflict.
Yes.
So how do you approach the subject of conflict? How do you resolve conflict between two people?
Can you be more specific with an example?
Sure. I guess as a lawyer, sometimes we cause conflict, right?
Yes.
Right. So think of a situation where it's just your friends as opposed to a client. A couple of friends are having a dispute about something. How do you, and they come to you and they say, help us, juror number 29, help us resolve this conflict. What tools do you bring to that type of a situation?
I think it's hard in conflicts that oftentimes there's both emotions and then someone's perspective and the facts of what's going on. So sometimes, depending on the person or friend that you're dealing with, you kind of have to take those step by step or separate them out, because maybe what appears to be the problem is not actually the problem. Comparing it more to in practice, that sometimes things are more about the principle than the facts or the law, and sometimes you have to talk to your client or opposing counsel or whoever it is to find out what's the root of the actual problem, because sometimes it's not what you always think.
Okay. Generally speaking, what area of law do you practice?
It would be civil litigation would be the most general.
Okay. Do you have any experience with criminal defense work
No,
or criminal prosecution work?
no.
Okay. Any other areas of law that you've practiced in?
No, it's all been civil litigation. I did do some clinic work in law school that involved female prisoners, but it was related to civil litigation.
Okay. So more specifically, rather than trying to resolve a conflict between two people, you're trying to determine which of these two people is telling the truth about a situation. How do you approach that?
Often comes down to credibility, if there's any sort of actual evidence, documents.
It's different as a lawyer, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you it this way. Have you ever had a client lie to you?
I believe so, yes.
And how do you deal with that type of a situation? Your client comes to you and says, I need you to do X for me because I just, insert lie here, right? And how do you resolve, A, is this actually a lie, right? And how do you then approach that with your client?
If it's an obvious fabrication or lie right at that moment, address it right then. If you uncover it later on that something that they told you last week or an hour ago is incorrect, then have to call up and have a hard conversation about what that lie likely did to the case and if I can continue representing them.
Okay. Because there would be, I'm going to not go there. Do you represent individuals or businesses? Or both?
Both. Vast majority would be a business.
Okay. But you have people who own those businesses? Right?
Correct.
Okay. And sometimes people act out of self-interest. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And sometimes they may fabricate or make up something to advance that self-interest.
They may.
And part of your role as an advocate or as a lawyer is to kind of ferret through some of those truthful things and not truthful things to best advance your client's cause. Agreed?
Agreed.
In terms of a situation where maybe one of your client comes to you and says something and you become convinced that they're telling you the truth. Like it's great. You have all of the evidence in the world. Have you ever had a situation where it turns out it's wrong?
Not yet.
Not yet.
At least to my knowledge.
That you know of, right?
Yes.
Just how about in your personal life? Have you ever been convinced that you're right about something and then later find out you're wrong about it?
I have.
Okay. How are you willing to re-examine your views on things?
Yes.
Now I'm going to ask you a few follow-up questions in terms of your questionnaire. Did you keep a copy of your questionnaire?
I didn't. I wish I had, but I did not.
Okay. It's not very good lawyering.
I know. I should have.
The first question asks you to state what you recall about this incident. You're familiar with this incident, obviously.
I am.
And you gave a pretty long, detailed recitation of what you remembered happening or viewing in the news, right?
Correct.
Okay. And the information that you received was all from various media sources?
It was.
Okay. In your questionnaire, you responded that you have seen some video of the death of Mr. Floyd on the news or the internet, and you approximated that you had seen it 2 or 3 times. Does that sound right?
I would say so.
Okay. And I just want to kind of go back and ask you a couple follow-up questions in this regard. Is it the entire, we refer to it as the Facebook video? Do you know what I mean when I say that?
I don't.
Okay. So do you understand there was a civilian bystander who took a video?
Yes.
And that video was uploaded into the social media site, and it went viral, and it became local, national, and international news, right?
Right.
That's the video I'm referring to. Is that the same video that you've seen 2 or 3 times?
I've never viewed it on Facebook, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Did it appear to be, the video you've seen, did it appear to be taken by a bystander?
Yes.
Okay. And is that the only video you've seen of this incident, as far as you know?
As far as I know, it might have been shown on a different platform, but yes, I believe so.
So did you go and, after you saw some news story, so let me clarify this. When you say you've seen it 2 to 3 times, are you referring to you've seen it 2 to 3 times on news stories?
The first time I ever saw it, it was on Instagram,
Okay.
and it was a short clip, maybe 30 seconds or so. And then I did see it on, I believe it was on CNN. But yeah.
Okay. But through, whether it be through social media, just general Googling, have you ever gone and tried to find a full, what we would refer to as a full-length video?
No, I haven't sought it out.
Okay. Have you ever seen the full-length video?
I'm not sure that I have. I don't think it's ever been that long.
Okay. So the majority of what you've seen, whether it be from news or social media platforms, is 30 seconds, a minute and a half, that kind of?
Correct.
Okay. And you also indicated that you and your friends and family members had had some conversations about this incident,
Yes.
and that even though they were months ago, you guys kind of just talked about it, right?
Right.
And really what you say here is that you take a very neutral view of both my client as well as Mr. Floyd, right?
Correct.
You were asked a question on this questionnaire relative to the what I'd refer to as the aftermath, the protesting and the rioting, and whether you thought that had a negative or a positive impact on our community. And you wrote, in general, negative. Uptown was destroyed and boarded up. Small businesses didn't deserve to have their places burned down.
Correct.
Okay. Do you think there was anything positive that came out of it?
I think in maybe not the methods, but I believe there is some positive awareness that has come of the incident. But yes, I would say overall it's been negative on our specific community, specifically Minneapolis and Uptown. I would say negative.
And you believe that you you believe you can be fair and impartial in this case.
I do.
And you may have a special appreciation because of your profession that you know you're obligated to follow the law as the judge gives it to you and the facts as presented in case.
Correct.
Right? And you can do that fairly and impartially.
I can.
You were asked a couple of questions in the questionnaire about both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. Do you recall what you wrote or the general content of it?
I think the question related to if I supported either of them. Was the
Yeah,
question?
did you view them favorably, very favorably, favorably, neutrally, somewhat disfavorably, or very disfavorably? I think is how it's phrased.
Okay.
And I believe you, for both of the Blue Lives and Black Lives Matter movements, you had a neutral response to it. With respect to Black Lives Matter, you wrote, I understand the movement. I do not actively participate in the movement. It does bring awareness to issues, but I don't always think the methods achieve any specific results, at least this far. That's what you wrote.
Correct.
You stand by that?
For the most part, yes.
How would you change it today?
It's hard to put into specific words. I stand by that general premise. It's hard to articulate. I know the movement has been going on for quite some time, and it's evolved over time. I think more of my specific experiences with it were more towards the infancy, where there might not have always been a clear path of something being articulated for, we're protesting because we want X, Y, Z to happen. And I think over time it has changed, but when I've been specifically have memories of it, it was more towards the infancy, and it wasn't always this clear path, and sometimes that was.
As the organization has evolved, do you think you've become more supportive of it or less supportive of it?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily changed my support for it. Maybe my appreciation for it changing, but I wouldn't say it somehow has made me more supportive of it, or, you know, the reverse. I wouldn't say that. With respect to the same thing with respect to the Blue Lives Movement, kind of the same similar approach to it, neutral. Yes.
You have a small child at home?
I do.
Okay. This is obviously a massive commitment. If you were to be selected as a juror, would you be concerned about caring for your child?
I would not. My child is in full-time daycare. The hours are the same as if I were to be at work. And I do have a support system in place that could step in if need be.
Okay. So I don't think it's the intent at this point, but there's a possibility, as is written in the questionnaire, that the jury could be sequestered and put up in a hotel. Would that change your concerns?
It does a little, but not enough for me to say that it would hinder me or stop me from being on the jury.
You did some work for a nonprofit legal organization.
Correct?
And was that in law? Is that what you were talking about in law school?
It was in law school, and then I continued volunteering from time to time since then.
Okay. You believe the jury system is fair in this country?
I think it's as fair as it can be if everything in the system is working properly, which of course is up for debate, but I think for the most part it can work.
Okay. And do you have those same feelings towards the criminal justice system?
I do. When I was volunteering in law school, I did see a different side of it when I was helping women in prison, and it did give me a different appreciation for just how hard it can be, that even if you're given all the tools while you're in the system, that sometimes life circumstances are just so hard that even if you have all the tools, you wind up going back just for environmental factors.
So the question the judge alluded to in terms of, do you want to serve as a juror on this case? And you kind of flip-flop a little back and forth. I mean, can we talk about that?
Sure. I think it'd be a little strange if someone had this like gut reaction of, yeah, I need to be on that jury. That would be a little strange to me. I think I'd be a very good juror. I think especially considering I have a legal education. I have a very good memory. I think that I have a lot of assets to be on a jury. Having a small child at home, it then gives me pause saying, well, that would be a big commitment. It could be emotionally draining. But then again, everybody has a job. Everybody has outside commitments and likely small children and people that they love and care about. So it's one of those, everyone has a civic duty, and I very much believe in that civic duty. So I went more on the neutral side because I think to say emphatically that I want to be on the jury is just a strange response.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. With respect to, if you were to be a juror on this case and you're sitting back in the jury room, you understand that your obligation would be to follow the law as Judge Cahill gives it to you. Do you understand that?
I do.
And you understand that you would have that obligation even if you disagreed with Judge Cahill's legal definitions. Do you understand that?
I do.
Now you're back in the, if you're in this jury and over the course of the next several months, or not weeks, excuse me, not months, next several weeks, it's going to become known that you're a lawyer. I'm assuming you're going to have conversations with your fellow jurors. How would you deal with any sort of pressure of potential jurors to ask you to help them understand the law?
Quite frankly, I'd probably come up with kind of a blanket statement of what you've already reiterated. Also, it's easy to fall on the fact that I do not practice criminal law, so I am not someone who they really should be asking that type of information from, because I don't know it just as much as they don't know it. That might not be completely true since I took criminal law. But, yeah, I would not be in a position where I'd be able to advise anyone on criminal law, and I would tell them as such.
Okay. Your Honor, can we have a very brief sidebar before I confer with my clients?
We're going to go off audio. As I told you before, this is on video, or this is not on video at any time, but this is on outside this courtroom. And so I would, do you need more
I need
inquiry?
a few minutes to, or just a moment to confer with my client. And
Absolutely.
thank you. Sorry. May I ask a few more questions?
Sure.
Just a follow-up question. So, ma'am, my principal concern is actually you, and I understand every potential juror may have children and things of that nature, but your child is quite young. If you were to be sequestered in a hotel for a month, would you be able to make arrangements for the care of your child?
I would.
Okay. I'm gonna just need one more second and be right back.
Other courtroom. We'll bring you back about 3:15.
All right.
All right, we stand in recess until 3:15.
Cut it. Cut it. I say cut it. Can you hear Grace?
Yep.
Cut it.
One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. You can hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Cut it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10.
I'm not getting the free audio.
No, that's your feet.
I'm getting everything.
Cut the house, bro. Cut the yellow.
You good? Look. It's everything. So that's what we're feeding out. You're literally getting cameras all there. That's all the audio that's on camera.
Cut it.
All right, we're back on the record. We will get juror 29 back. And thanks for your patience.
Of course.
Mr. Slisher, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Juror number 29. So you've been a practicing attorney for how many years?
9, I believe.
Okay. And have you ever been on this side? Have you ever had to conduct voir dire or do a jury trial?
I have done a jury trial, but it was I have done a trial, but it was a bench trial.
A bench trial.
Correct.
Okay. In what county?
It was in a western Lyon County. It wasn't in Hennepin County.
Okay.
It was up in St. Cloud.
Okay. Nature of that case, just very generally?
Default on a contract.
Okay. How long of a trial?
About an hour. It's
All
very
right.
short. I'm still counting it as a trial.
Absolutely.
I won for the record.
You're familiar, however, because of your legal training with the all of the different rules of court. So, for example, you probably know that sometimes attorneys make objections, and then there's a bench conference. And tell me, what is your understanding of what goes on at the bench conference after the attorneys make objections?
To my understanding, there's a conversation being had just outside the earshot of the jury, and a decision is being made.
And why is that conference held outside of the hearing of the jury?
Because it might relate to something that we're not supposed to hear or later disregard.
And that's something that you know based on your legal training and your experience. And the question I have is that if you were asked to serve as a juror in this matter, and just throughout the trial, especially in a relatively long one, chances are there are going to be objections. There'll be bench conferences. There'll be things that you recognize, like, okay, that's where the stuff that we're not supposed to hear is being discussed. Right? Would you find that distracting?
I mean, not really, no. I know it's just a normal part of the trial.
Would you find yourself speculating or wondering what exactly it is that we're not supposed to be hearing?
Maybe the first couple times, but after a while, I doubt it.
Well, you're a better person than I am, because that's probably all I would be wondering about is what I don't get to hear. But you're saying that you don't think that that's something that would enter your mind?
I think at the beginning it would, and especially if it's a long trial, over time it's just a part of what's happening.
And you recognize that there are very good reasons why some conversations have to happen outside of the earshot of the jury, because they're not supposed to hear it, because fundamental rights are at stake, or there could be some information that's particularly inflammatory or prejudicial. You understand that?
I do.
And just knowing that, let's say it happens more than once, are you able to completely disregard any sort of curiosity you might have about what we're discussing without you getting to hear about it?
I mean, as best humanly possible, yes.
I'd like to follow up on some of the questions or your responses to the questionnaire. One of the questions asked whether you agreed with the statement that blacks and other minorities not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system. And do you recall what your response was to that question?
I don't remember specifically what my response was.
How would you respond just now without knowing what you responded to before?
I do know that oftentimes when I am thinking about the system, I often think of it just from the court system side, not as much from, prison side. And I would say that there is sometimes not an equal access to justice and attorneys based on race that can be an issue. So I think in that respect, not everybody, including minorities, has equal treatment because they're not getting equal access, or the quality of representation and time spent on their cases might not be as much as someone who has the ability to retain well-known counsel or better counsel, as opposed to maybe getting a public defender who might be quite overworked. I'm not saying anything that they're not qualified attorneys and great at their jobs, but there is sometimes a disparity in that, and there's also the gap between people who qualify for certain legal assistance programs and people who don't, and so there's oftentimes not equal access to justice, is what I would say.
And I'm interested in hearing whether you believe that unequal access to justice is based on race, if it's a product of socioeconomic status, a combination. Could you describe any reason why you think that might exist?
I think it could be a combination of many factors. I think there are just some societal factors that might lead to it being based on race and where people are able to live, and then circumstances that happen. As for socioeconomic, definitely. Where I volunteer for my time, it's a lot of low-income people, but not low enough income that they get legal aid. And it might be someone who doesn't have enough money to, put in the meter to park their car. That it is very much based on socioeconomic of your access to justice.
I have some familiarity with the organization you're talking about. You started volunteering for that organization when you were in law school?
Correct.
And I think you described that you occasionally do from time to time, or you have continued. Is that something you've done continuously? Is it something you still do now?
I still do now. There was a brief period of time that I was not working in the Twin Cities, that it wasn't something I was able to do at that time because it wasn't in that part of the state. But once I returned, I started, yes. And it's still something I do now. I don't think they've been doing it out lately because of COVID. They tried it over the phone and it wasn't as successful, but I'm still on their list to volunteer.
Without disclosing any clients or anything specific, can you just tell me a little bit about the type of work you're doing for that organization?
Sure. I'm mostly writing letters to particular parties, letting those parties know about the income levels and liabilities and assets of various parties.
There's certainly, this is pro bono work you're doing.
Correct.
There's certainly a lot of opportunities to do pro bono work in the legal community in Minnesota. You've chosen this particular group and something that you've continued with. So if you could tell me a little bit about why you find this work important.
I very much enjoyed my experience when I was there in law school, and I gained a lot of knowledge at the firm I was at prior to the firm I'm at now, and I actually can use that direct knowledge to help the people that used to be on the other side of what I was doing. And oftentimes it's very simple information or something that's very basic to an attorney, or even just some basic life pointers that might not be obvious to other people. And you can give them this information even in a 20-minute time span, and you can make a world of difference for them. And some of them are just so thankful for your time that that's why I keep doing it.
Well, thank you for continuing in that work. I appreciate it. I'd like to follow up on another response that you gave on your questionnaire. And you were asked about the statement, Minneapolis police officers are more likely to respond with force when confronting black suspects than when dealing with white suspects. And in your response, you said that you somewhat disagreed with that statement. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that and the basis for saying that.
Sure. I believe I put somewhat disagree because I wouldn't say I'm neutral on it, but I also don't think I have enough information on it to actually be able to say in the affirmative that yes, they definitely respond with more force. So in that respect, I feel like I have to disagree because I don't have information that says yes, they would. But being neutral in it also doesn't feel like a correct response, so that's why I went somewhat disagree.
And it was, the question was specific to Minneapolis police officers, and so maybe I should ask you a little bit about your baseline and what, if any, experience you've had, direct observations you've had of Minneapolis police officers.
Not many. Maybe I've gotten a ticket or two, so that would be a
Really?
I mean,
Tell us all about that.
minor infractions.
Sure.
But other than that, I would say most of my interactions with any police officer or sheriff has mostly been confined to the courtroom for the most part. I don't think I've ever actually witnessed someone really getting arrested or anything like that I'd go, I've seen XYZ happen and here's what I'm feeling about it, or here's what I really haven't.
So it sounds, and I'm going to restate this, if I'm putting incorrect words in your mouth, please do correct me. I think you will. But it sounds like you're reading the question and you're not going to speculate about something that you don't have direct knowledge of. And so you said somewhat disagree because you couldn't say affirmatively that you think that that's true.
Correct.
Okay. So I'd like to make the question. Well, let me follow up on the last of that series of questions. And you were asked how you felt about the statement: the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities. And you responded that you somewhat disagree with that statement. And so I'd like you to, as best you can, just in your own words, just talk about that issue and how you came to that conclusion.
I would put it in the same category of how I responded to the last question about physical force, that I don't have enough information on it to be able to affirmatively say yes, and here's why. So that's why I said somewhat disagree.
So let me ask it a slightly different way. If somebody made the affirmative statement that the criminal justice system is biased against blacks and other minorities, and said that they had a basis for saying that, would you have a factual basis to dispute it? Would you argue with them, say, no, it isn't, and this is why?
I don't have those facts, so no, I would not be able to.
Okay. You indicated, I thought in the initial questioning, that you may possibly be familiar with or have contact with somebody at the state AG's office.
Correct. Just saying that, I have past classmates, people that I've previously worked with, that I know some people at one point or another have gone to the AG's office and left, so I can't state that I don't know anybody there. Okay. But I wouldn't be able to say I know these 5 people there and we go out to lunch every day. It's not to that extent.
Or that you know anyone who has said, in and among the other duties that I have at the AG's office, I'm working on this particular case.
No.
Okay. you indicated that your general impression of the defendant is neutral, and you stated that you believe that you would need to learn or know more about police protocols to form a true opinion. Can you please explain what exactly you were getting at with that answer?
Sure. I feel like a lot of people are jumping to a conclusion based on feeling and gut reaction, and this is what I would do. But the vast majority of people who are saying that are not police officers. And I'm not a police officer, and I don't know what police protocol is. I don't know what is a correct hold. I don't know what's an incorrect hold. I don't know if, this is what you normally do and this one you should never do. I don't know. And I can't form like an opinion that I'm going to put on paper under perjury saying, here's how I feel about him negatively or positively until I know the rest of the information. And I don't know that information.
So as a lawyer, you're looking at this document, taking it pretty seriously.
Yes.
That's understandable. All right, may I have a moment, Your Honor? Thank you, Your Honor. And one more follow-up. There was a question that was put to you. People today do not give our law enforcement officers the respect they deserve. And you indicated that you somewhat agree with that statement. Can you share with us a little bit about what you're basing that opinion on?
Sure. I think that, at least I'd say in the last, let's say, couple years, so many people have been focusing on negative cases, negative aspects of police work, that we're often not really looking at the positive and the positive things that police officers do for society, or even just something as simple as, if I'm in court and I need someone removed, that there's somebody there who will do it. And it's in many ways a thankless job, especially in the last couple of years, that I don't think it's always given the respect and think that it should.
Like if there was a problem here in court, you would rely on and expect the law enforcement officers to intervene, right?
Correct. And I've had to rely on that before, so it is nice.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a deep respect for law enforcement. Is that fair?
I would say so.
Okay. The question I have then is, given that deep respect and the thought that sometimes officers don't get the respect that they deserve from the rest of society, would it be difficult for you to judge the credibility of the testimony of a police officer in the same manner that you would judge the credibility of the testimony of another witness, say a bystander on the street?
No, I believe credibility comes down to every single witness. That it's not because the witness is a police officer that they're more credible than anyone else. And I would put, there are a lot of jobs that don't get a lot of respect, just the same as if a teacher were on trial. I think teachers aren't getting the respect that they deserve, and if a teacher's on trial, that you can still judge a teacher for doing something that other people say they don't agree with, but in general there still might be a great profession. But no, I would say credibility of anybody comes down to the witness, it doesn't matter what your profession is or lack of education. It's what you saw, how you remember it, things like that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your answers here today. Your Honor, the state will strike 29.
Jury 29, we're going to excuse you from this jury, and so there's no other jury duty that's related for this term. So just if you get a summons in the future, feel free to answer, or please answer. On the way out, the deputy will escort you and take the paperwork from you. All right. Yep. I know exactly what you're going to talk about. Let's hold off on the next. The next is a group advisory in any case. It's a group advisory to begin with, but we want to talk a little bit first. Okay, that juror has left. Mr. Nelson, I think we're talking about the same thing. Everybody check their email. It appears that the Supreme Court has denied review of the defendant's petition for review of the Court of Appeals opinion. I think we can talk about this tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. on its effect. I think we still have the jurisdictional issue with the Court of Appeals. So with that, everybody want to take a few moments. If it's short, you can absorb it pretty quickly. But let's go get the next group. My intent is to go through the group process and keep one and turn the rest loose for tomorrow. Because I think we can get through one, but I doubt much more. So, Mr. Schaefer, if you would. Okay, you can take just about any seat you'd like. And be seated, thank you. All right, well, good afternoon, members of the jury panel. First of all, can you all hear me? Because if not, if you're having trouble understanding me, we could get you hearing assistance devices. Okay. My name is Pete Cahill, and I'm one of the judges of the district court, and you have been summoned as potential jurors in the case of State of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, which is a criminal case related to the death of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. A person charged with a crime has a right to a fair trial before an impartial judge and an impartial jury. In order to make sure that the jurors who are selected are impartial, the law provides that the court and the attorneys for the parties may ask questions to all prospective jurors, which must be answered under oath. First, thank you for filling out the questionnaire that was mailed to you. Your contribution to the important and serious matter at hand is best served by your continuing to provide full and complete answers to the questions that you'll be asked today. These questions will follow up on issues from the questionnaire and possibly other topics. Now, after the questioning is over, the attorneys will have the right to excuse some of you from service on this jury, and I may excuse others of you for what is called cause. In either case, it does not mean that you are not a fair person, and you should not take offense in being excused. I also ask that you not take any offense at any question you may be asked. We must pry, to some extent, in order to explore opinions you might hold and hear about experiences that you have had that might affect your ability to serve in this case. Now, the defendant, Mr. Chauvin, has been charged with murder in the second degree and manslaughter in the second degree. In the normal course of trials, charges may be added to or subtracted from those charges, but those are the charges as it stands today. Now, to those charges, the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty, which is a denial of each and every material allegation in the charges. And I'm now going to ask the participants in the case to introduce themselves and their clients so that you can tell me whether or not you recognize anyone for the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Slisher, appearing on behalf of the state of Minnesota.
Good afternoon. My name is Christina Marinakis, and I'm assisting with the prosecution.
Hello, Keith Ellison with the state. Thank you.
And Joshua Larson, also with the state. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Nelson, if you could introduce yourself and your client.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Nelson. This is my client, Derek Chauvin, my assistant, Amy Voss.
All right, thank you. Anybody on the panel recognize anybody who has introduced themselves? Okay, no hands. Other than maybe perhaps on the news or anything like that. Are you acquainted, let me put it, that's a better way. Are you acquainted with anybody who is introduced themselves? All right. Does anybody on the panel have anyone they know? There are other attorneys who might be making an appearance for the state. Matthew Frank, Aaron Eldridge, Jerry Blackwell, and other people who work for the Office of the Attorney General. Anybody know anybody who works in that office? Recognize any of those names? Okay, and your juror number?
31.
31. Who do you recognize?
I recognize Jerry Blackwell.
Okay, are you an attorney? Former attorney. As a retired, before you retired, did you have cases against Mr. Blackwell? Okay, but you're familiar with him? And did you work professionally with him? Okay, but you recognize the name?
I do.
Okay, thank you. The fact that you recognize his name, is that going to cause any concern here?
No.
Okay. All right, anybody else who knows somebody in the Attorney General's office? Okay. Anybody know anybody who works for Mr. Nelson's firm that you're aware of? Okay. You have been given a list of potential witnesses. I'd like you to look that over if you have not done so already. But when you come in for individual questioning, we're going to ask you if you know anyone on that list. And again, for the same reason. Do you know them? Would it affect your ability to be a juror? Now, one of the things that the attorneys may not do during jury selection is to instruct you on the law. But I do want you to be aware of some of the basic concepts that apply in all criminal cases so that you may keep them in mind as you answer the court's and the attorney's questions. So I will instruct you as follows. First, the charges against the defendant are not evidence and they create no inference of guilt. No member of the jury should in any way permit himself or herself to be prejudiced against the defendant because a charge has been made against him or because he has been placed on trial. The defendant is presumed innocent of the charges made against him, and in order for you to find the defendant guilty, the state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant does not have to prove his innocence. The presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial unless and until he has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt according to the law and the evidence admitted at trial. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such proof as ordinarily prudent men and women would act upon in their most important affairs. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. It does not mean a fanciful or capricious doubt, nor does it mean beyond all possibility of doubt. Now, if you serve on this jury, you and your fellow jurors will be the sole judges of whether a witness is to be believed and of the weight to be given a witness's testimony. There are no hard and fast rules to guide you in this respect. In determining believability and weight of testimony, jurors may take into consideration the witness's interest or lack of interest in the outcome of the case, the relationships to the parties, ability and opportunity to know, remember, and state the facts, manner, age and experience, frankness and sincerity, or the lack thereof, the reasonableness or the unreasonableness of their testimony in light of all the other evidence in the case, and any other factors that bear on believability and weight. If on this jury, you should rely on the last analysis upon your own experience, good judgment, and common sense. There are things you should not do during jury selection. You are not investigators. You are not to go out to do any looking. You're not to ask people about this matter. You're not to use the internet to look for information about the case or about the law. And above all, you must not talk to anyone who is involved, the lawyers or the witnesses. Do not be offended if the attorneys, parties, or witnesses do not speak to you. They know that it would be improper to contact you except through the normal selection process, and they will confine themselves to a brief greeting. During the selection process, your family and friends will be curious as to what you are doing. You may tell them you are on a panel of potential jurors in a criminal case, and that is all you should tell them. Since that is all you should tell family and friends, that is all you should tell the general public. So, during these proceedings, please refrain from using Facebook, Twitter, and other social media to announce that you are a potential juror or to comment on this trial. You may access those social media tools, but please do not publish any information about this case or your thoughts about this case. You do not have to stay away from people and refuse to speak to them. Do whatever you wish, but do not talk about the case, and above all, do not talk at all to anyone involved in it. Now, because of the nature of the charges, this case is receiving media coverage. Do not read about this case in the newspapers or online, and do not listen to news about it on radio or television. Now, this trial, including jury selection, is being televised, but no video of you or any other juror will be taken at any time, now or during trial if you are selected. Also, your name will not be used in the courtroom. You will only be referred to by your random number to protect your privacy. The audio of anything you say during jury selection will be broadcast, unless we need to discuss something that is deeply personal or extremely sensitive or embarrassing, or might very clearly reveal your identity. In those cases, I will specifically order that the audio not be broadcast. In that case, you will still have to answer questions. It will still be on the record, but it will be without any audio being broadcast outside the courtroom. And with that, first of all, I appreciate your patience in waiting as we go through this process. And with the exception of juror number 30, I'm going to release the rest of you till tomorrow to come back at 9 o'clock. We're trying to adjust the number of people we bring in based on how quickly or slowly we're going, and it varies, and so it's not a perfect science. But I think I'm fairly confident that we can get through 31, 36, 37, and 38 tomorrow morning. And so please return. Try and be here by 8:30 so that we can start right at 9 o'clock and possibly a little earlier. We will be in session at 8 o'clock dealing with other matters, but we hope to get to you at least by 9 o'clock, if not a little before. So if you could be here by 8:30, that would be greatly appreciated. So with that, again, advice, don't read about the case, and we'll see you tomorrow morning, except for number 30, who can stay behind and will direct you to the appropriate witness chair. Thank you. And you can go with the deputy. Okay. And you're juror number 30, I assume. Come on up. right here, the witness chair right next to me. And I realized somebody left their mask there. You can just, if you would like, leave it or toss it aside. We have plexiglass between us, and I'm going to continue to wear my mask. However, it might be easier for everyone to hear and for you to speak during the selection process if you take your mask off. But if you prefer to keep it on, you may certainly do so. I leave.
Prefer to keep it on, but if there are any issues with intelligibility, let me know.
So far, so good. It's actually doing pretty well. I would ask you to pull up to the microphone a little
Yep.
bit. We can't, unfortunately, move the microphone very much. It's pretty hardwired in place. But yeah, feel free to keep it on while we go through this process. Before I turn it over to the attorneys, there are a couple things we need to do. First of all, I'm going to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do. I did.
All right, thank you. Before I turn it over to the attorneys, I'm going to ask this question. You filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing so. That was quite a while ago, but can you verify that everything on that questionnaire was true?
Yes.
And are there any changes or additions? Because you filled it out, quite a while ago, and in the interim, you might realize you left out some information or something was inaccurate. Your opinions have evolved a bit. So if there's anything like that that you can think of right now.
Not to my knowledge, but
Okay. The attorneys will go through the questionnaire a little more in detail, and so something might come up that's different from what's in your questionnaire. Don't worry that it may appear different or additional. That's certainly understandable given the dynamics of the situation. The questionnaire did advise you not to read any articles or pay attention to any media about the case, and I assume you've done that, but we also recognize that in the months since you filled it out, you might inadvertently come across information, a headline, maybe a friend talks to you and shares some information that you weren't aware of before. Now, you already indicated what you knew about the case at the time you filled out your questionnaire, and that was good. We expect that most people have heard something about it, and so we appreciate knowing what it is you heard to the best of your ability. But is there anything in that interim space that you've learned?
yeah, the only things that I've learned was just by being around in life that there may have been a juror selected over the last couple of days.
Okay.
And then I personally was concerned for the live streaming element of this. So I did look at the live stream yesterday for a couple of minutes just to see if witnesses or potential jurors could be seen. Yeah.
Well, and we prefer you don't do that.
Yeah.
But
Realize
what
that.
did you get from that short experience?
I've learned nothing new about the case, and I've tried to refrain from reading any articles about any facts related to the case. And I have just, heard while listening to the news of the date of the case or something like that. Yeah.
And when you went to see how it looks here, were you satisfied with that your identity was being sufficiently protected?
Yes.
All right. And we even do that to the extent of if there's something in your questionnaire, for example, if you say you're the head coach of the Timberwolves, it's not too hard to figure out who you are. By the way, he's not on the witness list. But it's that type of thing where if it is so unique that people would be able to identify you, we might have to talk about it, but we would do so by shutting off the audio. I don't recall anything in your questionnaire that would fall into that, but just knowing all that, does that give you comfort in answering questions?
Yes.
All
Thank
right.
you.
And as far as the physical layout of the courtroom and the COVID restrictions we've put in place, you're fine with all that?
Yes.
Okay. So, part of the thing with the questionnaire is not to say that we only want people who've never heard of the case. I think that would be hard to do. And that's not the legal standard either. What we're looking for are people who can tell us what they know, but then put that aside. And they may form opinions. Everybody who has been exposed to this case probably has certain opinions about the case or about the people involved. But again, got to put those aside. As a jury, you decide this case only on the evidence that you hear in court and applying the law as I give it to you and not follow your own standards. Do you think you could do that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you recognize any witnesses on the long list that you were given?
No, I do not.
Right, and let's see, do we do that? I think you may have answered something about the length of the trial. Do you have any problem with the length of the trial that we have here?
I've seen the prospect of the length of the trial, and as with anyone, it will impact.
It's going to be
everyone,
4
so-
weeks starting March 29th.
Okay.
Is our best guess.
Okay.
And so the lawyers will probably follow up on that. As you sit here right now, is there anything that would absolutely prohibit you from doing that?
No.
All right. Anything else you would have a question about before I turn it over to the attorneys?
No.
All right, Mr. Nelson, if you could inquire as to juror number 30.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
So before I begin my questioning, I'm just going to again introduce myself. My name is Eric Nelson. I represent Mr. Chauvin. I'm going to ask you a series of kind of general questions, and after that I'll go in and follow up with some questions about your responses to the questionnaire. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
So, but before I do that, I just kind of want to ask you about, so you logged in into the live stream yesterday?
Yes. Yeah, I was uncertain of the process of being seen or unseen, and that was about it.
Okay, and I appreciate the concern. I guess I just want to know, how long did you listen?
I listened for 2 times for approximately 2 minutes.
Okay, and were
Each.
were jurors being questioned, or were there discussion of legal issues?
Jurors being questioned, and I saw one or two questions from you, and that was all that I saw during that time.
Okay, so 1 or 2 questions that I was asking of a potential or prospective juror?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Just a reminder, we do need to use yes and no rather than the colloquial mm-hms, yes, or the mm-hms, stuff like that.
Yes,
Okay?
thank you.
All right. So, you and I meet at a party or some social gathering. What are a few things you want me to know about you?
I love music. I love to, I largely do music. I love musical theater. And I love to meet new people and interact with people.
Okay. And you born and raised in Minnesota?
Wisconsin until age 24, something like that. Yeah.
And then moved over to Minnesota?
And then moved over to Minnesota.
Okay. And what was your initial reaction when you got the jury summons?
A bit of shock, but I tried to just take it in and say, I'll be present in the moment and deal with it when the time comes.
Did you receive notice of your jury service at the same time you received the questionnaire to fill out?
No, I believe I received one and then the other.
Okay. So if you can try to remember back to that point, when you get the first letter that says you have jury duty in March of 2021, your initial reaction was kind of shock?
Yeah, it's something different in the mailbox.
Okay. And then you subsequently got a packet with the questionnaire and instructions on how to fill that out and return it back, right?
Yes.
And you learned that you would be a potential juror in this case, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And how did you feel when you learned that information?
It is a difficult case with a lot of attention on it, so I took it with even more weight, that it is an opportunity to serve, and it's also a heavy burden on anyone involved in the case.
I am just going to ask you to, it's not the muffle, I think it's just the,
Oh, sure.
there,
Oh,
that's
there we go.
much better, yes.
Yes.
So could you just repeat that? I'm sorry.
I believe I said that it was, given the national attention, that it's a even more of an important civic duty, to, if discerned, for me to serve or not to serve.
Okay. Did you have concerns about your physical safety if you were to be selected?
No, I don't think so.
Did you have concerns about any sort of safety surrounding being a member of this juror?
No. Yeah, coming here was, it felt a little weird, but yeah.
Tell me about that. What do you mean by it felt a little weird coming here?
Well, there's a heightened level of security around the area, and puts someone a little bit on at ease. But that's all. Yeah.
Okay. When you saw the level of security, did it make you feel a little better, or was it more just sort of a shock to yourself?
It was, I think it just heightened the level of just trying to be present here and trying to listen and discern and hear what you and others will ask me.
Okay. Now, can you think of a situation in your life where you have been called upon to resolve a dispute or a conflict between two people?
Yes, I believe so.
And can you just give me a, again, without identifying any people or places, just a general sense of what that dispute was like?
Trying to pick one, but I would say misspeaking and raising. That's interesting to think about times that you recalled into your life. So my apologies.
It's okay.
I would bring up a time where I stayed longer socializing with friends and introducing my wife to multiple people, where she's more of an introvert, and not realizing that her comfortability was where mine was at, and then later realizing that she felt a little uncomfortable, and discussing with her and learning, that she felt like it was time to go, time to, just take some time and not be introduced to as many people as I had planned.
Okay. And so that was like a dispute involving you and your wife?
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
What about a situation, however, where you're not directly involved in the dispute, but you're asked to resolve a dispute between two other people?
Yep. With COVID, it's hard to think of when you
Sure. Well,
have been around
let's
multiple people.
make it more general.
Sure.
In a situation, and again, just from your life experience, you don't have to give me any details about the incident, but how do you resolve a dispute between two people? What tools do you bring to that analysis? What do you think is important in order to help two people resolve a dispute?
To help two people resolve a dispute, it's important to meet where they both are, and to hear both sides of what they're discerning and discussing, and to try to find some common ground if need be, if possible, and to try to form, try to have some compassion for one another and understanding and discernment of one another.
Okay. And again, I just wanted to verify that I remembered enough about you that from your questionnaire, and it without referencing where. But it's my understanding you work in a church, right?
That is correct.
And you have a position within a church of leadership, right?
Yes.
And would you describe it as a larger congregation or a smaller congregation?
It is in between, a couple hundred people, and with COVID and with starting that position in late 2019, I probably haven't even met most of the members of the congregation, or some of the members of the congregation.
Okay, so you haven't had well, in that context, you're a leader in a leadership position in a church, and there's a congregation, and congregants will have disputes with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed?
Yes.
Okay. And in that context, so what you're saying, as I understand, is you want to try to meet them where they're at, try to encourage communication between the two, and exhibit compassion towards both sides.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's all wonderful and admirable, right? But we're humans, and human conflict sometimes requires more to resolve. Agreed?
Agreed.
So if you were in that predicament where you have two of your parishioners who are in dispute, how do you solve that, right? I mean, what are the steps and tools you take beyond the kind of the general approach, right? Does that make sense to you?
Sure. Yeah. It very much depends upon the severity of what's going on. Things that sometimes happen in churches would be, there's an issue with what happened with the sound, for example. Hopefully I'm being heard and clear with diction as I speak into the microphone. And sometimes it would fall on someone that it was not going well. And as a leader, I would want to step in and try to help take some of the pressure off of the person who was responsible for the mistake, and to try to implement better training or try to help them out instead of taking sides and saying, "Oh, yeah, that was on them. They shouldn't have they shouldn't have messed up the audio that day," or something like that.
Okay.
Or for a specific song choice, there's people have very, very different preferences when it comes to music or something like that. So our preferences need to be considered and taken into mind, and if it's appropriate to meet the one side with, yeah, we'll throw in a hymn the next week and try to reflect some of what your feeling of tradition or what makes you feel comfortable, then that is easy to meet them there.
Okay. And in that context, have you ever been involved with two parishioners or congregants where one person is saying situation A happened, right? This happened. And another person who was a participant in that very same event said, that's not what happened. This is what happened, right? How do you reconcile, or how do you resolve that conflict? And then also, how do you tell which person is being more truthful about the circumstance?
I would talk to both of them individually, and then I would see if there were other people at the specific situation that occurred, and hear them out as well. Possibly discern or talk with other leaders of the church, whether it be volunteers or staff, to decide where to go from there. Communicate with my boss or my pastor in this case. Yeah.
Okay. And so you're a part of a staff of a larger staff, right?
I'm part of a staff of a church, of a mid-sized church, which is, of a few staff.
Okay. And so within that context, do you make group decisions on how to best implement a plan, or?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And how do you feel that you work within that group context?
It depends upon what is being addressed. We all have our different areas where we lead and discern what is best for the group. And as a member of a church, the pastor is generally the leader. So they make the final say, and we work within that structure.
So if I understand you, you would say there are certain circumstances based on your area of expertise where you may be more of a leader.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And other circumstances within a group where it's less of your expertise, so you're going to be more of a follower in a sense.
Yes.
Okay. So this is obviously, these questions are kind of geared around, this is a group decision-making process, right? You understand that that's what a jury is.
Yes.
And there is no one leader, right? Do you understand that?
Correct. And
all 12 jurors, if you were to be on this jury, would have to agree unanimously. Do you understand that?
Yes.
If you held a particular position about some piece of evidence in this case, right? And you felt it was important, but other members of the jury had a completely different perspective on that same piece of information. How do you reconcile that in the group context?
Sure. Well, first off, I would hear them out. I would listen to them before speaking. And then I would reflect personally on what was addressed and talk with the other jurors and try to come to a solution together. I understand that there will be moments in this case where there will be opinions that contradict each other and go against each other, and I would be a group worker that would try to work best with the group to come to some sort of conclusion.
And I guess, along those lines, if you were to be so convinced that this piece of information was the key, right? Whatever this may be, this is the key. But there are other people who disagree with you. Would you simply abandon your position in the name of building consensus?
I don't think I can say that with certainty based on not knowing that situation. I am one to work and mediate with people. That is for certain. And if I believed so strongly in something, I would be discussing that with other people for a while.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't just abandon your convictions without further evidence to the contrary. Would that be fair to say?
Correct. I certainly would listen and hear out the other side in any situation, as I want to be someone who is fair. And yeah, if there's something very strongly that I believed, I would continue to discuss it further.
So I want to ask you some follow-up questions on your questionnaire, and I recognize that you filled this out a few months ago and that you don't have a copy of it, I'm presuming.
Nope.
And I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not trying to convince you, or anything. I just want to ask you some follow-ups. And if you want me to read things, I will do so. All right? And so, the first question in the questionnaire asks you to kind of reflect upon what you had seen or heard or knew about this case. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you wrote a sizable paragraph based on what you had heard about this case, right?
Yep. Everything I could think of at the time.
Right. And I want you to know that it's okay for you to have opinions about this case, and it's okay for you to have strong opinions about this case. Ultimately, your role as a juror is to decide the case based on the evidence that's presented in this courtroom, not on those opinions and not on what you may have heard months ago. Agreed?
Agreed.
Can you do that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, so I'm going to ask you some questions about some of the opinions that you had formed and some of the words that you used to describe those opinions. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the questions asks, from what you have seen, read, or heard, do you have a general impression of the defendant? And then it gave you some boxes to check in. Let's say very negative, somewhat negative, neutral, somewhat positive, or positive, very positive. So kind of a spectrum, right? And you checked the box very negative. Do you remember that?
Sure. Yes.
And when the questionnaire asks, why do you feel that way? You wrote, despite calls for help of I can't breathe from Floyd, it seems Derek murdered Floyd and the others saw or assisted the chokehold which resulted in death. Do you remember writing that?
Yes.
Okay. So it's fair to say that you formed an opinion based on what you had seen in the news or conversations from other people or social media.
Yes.
That was very bad.
Yes. And of course, I do not know Derek, and I did not watch the video, which I'm sure we will cover. And as a juror or a prospective juror, I would have to refrain to what is discussed and discerned in this courtroom.
And I understand that, and that's where we're going to kind of talk about some of those things. So, but you made some interesting word choices in your answer that I want to explore with you, if that's okay.
Yep.
You said it seemed Derek murdered Floyd, right?
Yes.
And that was the opinion that you had of my client at the time you wrote this, correct?
Correct.
And so you're familiar, because the questionnaire also asks you about things like the presumption of innocence and proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You remember those questions?
Yes.
Okay. My question for you is, knowing that there's this legal principle of the presumption of innocence, and you've already formed an opinion that my client murdered Mr. Floyd, can you set aside that opinion, apply the presumption of innocence, and listen to this case?
Yes, I can.
And you also, in this same paragraph, reference a chokehold which resulted in death, right? Now, one of the issues that we'll ultimately have to decide is what was the cause of death. Can you set aside your previous opinion that it was a chokehold that resulted in death and listen to the evidence in this case?
Yes. If discerned that I was an appropriate juror for this case, I would try to be as clean of the slate as possible.
And that's ultimately what we need to ask, because at the time that you if you were to be called on this juror, you have to actually be able to say, I can do it, right? Not I can try or I think I can. I need you to be able to say, I can do it. And it's clear from some of your responses that you have some pretty strong, and we can talk through some of these, but some pretty strong positions in terms of social justice issues, in terms of racial issues, in terms of policing within this country, right? All of those opinions, they matter to you, right? And you hold them dear. Agreed?
Yes.
But in this case, we're asking you to say none of that matters.
Yes.
Can you confidently say you can do that?
Yes.
You've discussed this case with some friends and family members, correct?
Yes, before. Yes.
Understood before you filled this out. Since that time, you've not told anyone else that you're here or talked about this case, right?
No, correct.
And what you talked about were things such as the need for police reform through making or providing alternative methods of response like social workers or other community resources to better fit calls to 911 and help make police officers' jobs less, or job tasks less diverse, and offer some other resources. So you have a pretty strong position that people who call 911, maybe the police shouldn't have to respond to all of these calls?
Yes, I believe that what is asked of our police officers is immense, and they, in general, do a very good job of serving our community. And it'd be great if there were help for a friend who is, a friend who is discerning whether or not to commit suicide, if they would be able to receive or call a number for a social worker helpline. Yeah.
Okay. So you are, I believe you said you somewhat agreed with the concept of defunding the Minneapolis Police Department.
I have listened to that that idea, and I believe that there should be additional steps taken to provide those social worker supports that would help all people feel better and feel like they have more resources to respond to an emergency with.
And in fact, according to your questionnaire, you've actually financially supported efforts for police reform, right?
Correct.
Does that mean you've donated money to various organizations?
Yes, I've donated money to organizations that advocate for listening to diverse voices and perspectives, and to form policy opinions on that.
Okay. And you also indicate that you've written some letters to elected officials in support of those same notions, right?
Yes.
With respect to your perspective on race and justice in this country, you've also taken, as I understand, a fairly strong position in that regard, right?
Yes.
One of the questions asks you whether blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and you strongly agreed with that notion, right?
Yes.
Can you just expand and tell me, what do you mean by that? Why do you strongly agree with that statement?
I strongly agree with it because there's been research done, for example, with African American people and the use of marijuana. I believe they are 3 times more likely to be arrested for the use of marijuana compared to their white peers, and that there are certain instances that happen within a traffic stop where it's more likely to escalate with diverse people with officers than with their white counterparts.
Okay. And you also indicated that you believe that the criminal justice system, or you strongly agree, I should say, with the statement that the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities.
Yes, I do believe that, and it's an implicit bias. It's one that sometimes I don't even recognize, that I may be biased towards someone else without even realizing it.
Well, and that raises an interesting, I guess, counterpoint, because the questioner asks you to agree or disagree with the following statement: I do not trust the police. And you you somewhat agreed with that proposition. So do you have a personal experience with the police that causes you to mistrust police officers?
No, I've had, in general, great experience with the police, and my perspective largely comes from seeing other incidents where people of color have been poorly treated by the police.
And so your mistrust of the police is within the context of racial issues?
Yes.
There's a question that says, because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second-guess decisions they make while on duty, and you strongly disagreed with that concept.
I believe we all should be held accountable for our actions that we do in our daily life, and that goes for the police as well.
Okay. And so, I guess I want to ask, can you think of a situation unique to a police officer where an officer has to make a very fast decision and he may be wrong?
Yep.
Okay. And I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't second guess it or look into it, but is that understandable?
Yes, we're all fallible people. We can all make mistakes.
Now, you were asked a series of questions about both the Black Lives Matter organization or movement, as well as the Blue Lives Matter organization or movement. And you are very favorable of the Black Lives, or you think very favorably of Black Lives Matter, and very unfavorably of Blue Lives Matter. Do you remember checking those boxes?
Yes.
And in the context of your answer regarding the Black Lives Matter movement, you are in favor of defunding traditional models of policing. You wrote that?
Some traditional models of policing, yes.
Okay. And the Blue Lives Matter, you state that it was well-intentioned but misguided.
Correct. Our police officers are service members that are they impact our lives and help by and large, and it's misguided when it comes to the verbiage of Blue Lives Matter when placed in context of history, I believe.
And what you wrote was the movement is unintentionally, parenthetical, for the most part, racist, as it takes the Black Lives Matter cause and adopts its saying.
Correct, yeah.
You also indicate that you are members of certain organizations, including certain members of, or certain organizations that advocate for racial justice, right?
Correct.
You also had some, there were some questions about criminal justice, the criminal justice system. And the question was, do you believe our criminal justice system works? Why or why not? And you stated that you believed it's in disrepair, largely because of laws that focus on crimes committed by poorer people. I don't believe jail should be as unduly used for nonviolent crimes.
Correct.
So again, I kind of want to circle back, and sir, it's okay. You know, I'm not challenging your beliefs, right? I'm not questioning your right to believe what you believe, and I'm not disagreeing with you in many contexts. But what I have to be certain of, I don't know what's in your heart. Only you do, right? I have to trust what you're telling us. Everything that you've answered in terms of all of these questions are really focused on, you know, racial justice, defunding the police, a mistrust of police because of racial issues, organizations that advocate for defunding the police. You've contributed financially to these organizations. You have very unfavorable views of this incident, right? You've formed very strong opinions, right? And so your whole being, right? Your whole being is being put on the question here, right? And despite all of those beliefs, despite all of those deeply held convictions, you think you can just set that aside and be a fair and impartial juror in this case?
I believe I could if you and anyone, if the court came to that discernment that I was a proper juror for this trial.
Doesn't it feel kind of like walking into the lion's den in a sense for you?
I think for most anyone that's walked into this, they'd be lying if they didn't say that. Yeah.
So again, I have to know there's a difference between I think I can and I can. Right? Do you think you can do it, or can you do it?
I can be a fair juror who puts his perspective only within the bounds of this courtroom.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Your Honor, may I have a moment?
Whatever. Juror 30, I'm going to ask you a question, kind of a follow-up to where we're at on this fair and impartial. And you gave a very honest and, to be honest, deferential kind of, if we think you can be fair and impartial, then you will. But it's kind of a little bit putting the onus on us to make the decision if you can be fair and impartial, and ultimately we will. But we need to know, because only you know yourself well enough to say that I can be fair and impartial. I know myself. I know what I know what my opinions are, but I know my duty, if I'm a juror, is be fair and impartial. And based on certain topics, some jurors very honestly say, I don't think I can. High likelihood I would try. I've never met a juror who didn't say they would try to be fair and impartial. And if you could tell me, I not only could try, and we're just asking you from the knowledge of yourself, do you think could you be fair and impartial?
I can be fair and impartial.
All right, thank you. Mr. Nelson.
We'll exercise the prerogative.
All right, the defense is going to excuse you, Mr. Juror 30. And so you're free to go about your business. If you get a summons in the future, come back for jury service. But this does complete your jury service for this term.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your answers to the questions and filling out the questionnaire.
Thank you.
And the deputy will take some paperwork from you. All right, that just the right amount of time. We've run out of jurors. We have the petition for review being denied to talk about tomorrow because we still have pending the Court of Appeals regarding staying jurisdiction, or whether I have jurisdiction to continue jury selection or not, or not. And so we have to also talk about that and how it plays into the two. And I believe I'm going to bring in 5 jurors for tomorrow morning and 4 in the afternoon. That seems to be more shooting more accurately for not keeping people waiting inappropriately. So, anything else that we need to go over for the record?
One moment, Chair.
Anything for the record?
Nothing.
After you've had a chance to talk, could you send the court the numbers of the motions that we're going to deal with tomorrow in addition to the pending appellate litigation?
Sure.
All right. And I think I have for tomorrow numbers 31, 36, 37, 38, 39 for the morning, and 40, 41, 42, and 43. Is that correct, Mr. Schaefer? Okay, just so we know that. All right. 8 o'clock tomorrow, we'll renew motions. Thank you. We're in recess.